Organelles are pretty much little organs inside of the cell. They're sort of little compartments that the cell has. Each one has its own job. We've already looked at what they look like, so now we're going to look at what their functions are. The first one we're going to look at is the cell membrane. The cell membrane is located on the outside of the cell, and you should remember this picture from when we studied biomolecules. This is a picture of the phospholipid bilayer that makes up the cell membrane. We've got the glycerol heads on the lipids and the fatty acid tails on the lipids. And we made a human version of the cell membrane in class, if you remember, where the people's heads were the glycerol and their arms were the fatty acids. So you should always remember that a diagram that looks like this. This is the cell membrane. It's called a lipid bilayer because it has two layers. Its function is that it controls what moves in and out of the cell, and it's important to remember that it's made of lipids. It also has some protein in it, and those proteins make protein channels through the membrane, which are sort of like doors that let things in and out. The next thing is the nucleus, and the nucleus is one you should be familiar with. It's in the middle of the cell. It contains your DNA, and it's surrounded by a nuclear envelope. That nuclear envelope is important because without it there wouldn't be a nucleus. The difference between a prokaryotic cell and a eukaryotic cell is that nuclear envelope that contains the DNA. So that nuclear envelope is on the outside of the nucleus. It's a membrane, so that means it's going to be made of lipids just like the cell membrane, and it also controls what moves in and out of the nucleus. So it's very similar to the cell membrane, except it's just a membrane around the nucleus. Then we've got the ribosomes. Ribosomes are found on the rough endoplasmic reticulum, which is always located near the nucleus. Ribosomes are little tiny bumps, and they make that rough endoplasmic reticulum look rough. This is the site where proteins are constructed, and we know that proteins are made of amino acids, so this is where those amino acids get put together. Then we have chromatin, which is effectively the same thing as DNA, so you can think about chromatin like your genetic information. And it's found inside the nucleus. It gives instructions on how to make proteins. Without instructions from the chromatin, the ribosomes wouldn't know what order to put the amino acids in, and so it needs those instructions to be able to make the right proteins. Then we've got the cytoplasm. And the cytoplasm is the filler material inside the cell, so it sort of takes up all of the space that isn't already taken. It's a thick, clear fluid, sort of the consistency of gelatin, and it's the site of many important chemical reactions. The smooth endoplasmic reticulum does not have ribosomes, but it looks very similar to the rough endoplasmic reticulum. It's involved in the transport of proteins. Once the ribosomes make the proteins, they are transported throughout the cell by the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and it also detoxifies things that might be poisonous to your cell. Then we got the rough endoplasmic reticulum. The rough endoplasmic reticulum is what houses the ribosomes, and it's always located near the nucleus. It's covered in ribosomes, that's why we call it rough, and it helps the ribosomes make protein. Then we've got the Golgi apparatus. The Golgi apparatus, it looks sort of like a folded stack of clothes, and it is where chemicals are stored. It's also the shipping and receiving department of the cell. It helps to package and move things. You can think about this like the post office of the cell. It's where things get put into a package and an address gets put on them so that they can be sent to where they need to go. Then we've got vesicles and vacuoles. They're storage compartments inside the cell. Vacuoles are usually larger than vesicles, and they're usually found in plant cells, although vacuoles can be found in animal cells as well. Vesicles are smaller and are usually found in animal cells, although vesicles can be found in plant cells as well. They're both used to store things. Most of the time they're used to store water. Then we have the lysosomes, and lysosomes are similar to vesicles and vacuoles, except instead of just being used for storage, lysosomes contain enzymes, and we know that enzymes, one of the things they can do is break things down. So the lysosomes contain these enzymes that break things down, and it can help break down old organelles or food or things like bacteria and microbes that might infect your cell. So the lysosome is kind of like the garbage disposal of the cell. It breaks things down so they can be thrown away. Then we've got the mitochondria. Mitochondria are shaped kind of like a bean, and they break down carbs to produce energy. This is called the powerhouse of the cell because that's where the cell gets its energy from. Then the last thing we have in both plant and animal cells is the cytoskeleton, and the cytoskeleton is sort of a bunch of branches that hold up the cell membrane. It's made of centrioles, microtubules, and microfilaments, and it holds the shape of the animal cell. Just like you wouldn't be able, or you would lose your shape if you didn't have your skeleton, the cell would sort of lose its shape without the skeleton of the cell, the cytoskeleton, so it supports the cell membrane. Here are two organelles that are found only in plant cells. The first one is the cell wall. It's on the outside of the cell, and it protects and gives support to the plant cell. It's made of cellulose, which is a carbohydrate. And then we've got the chloroplast, and the chloroplast is what gives the plant cell its green color. This is the site of photosynthesis, and glucose is made in this organelle. Glucose is like the plant's food. Because plants can't eat food, they have to make their own food inside their cells. And so the food that they make is called glucose. And then there are two organelles that are only found in animal cells, and these are for movement because most of the time animals need to be able to move. The first one is cilia, and cilia, it looks like little hairs on the outside of a cell. We say that it's hair-like projections that help the cell move. And very similar to that, we have the flagellum. The flagellum is like the cilia, but it's a tail. It's a tail-like structure that helps the cell move, so it's generally longer than the cilia.